All right, get ready because we're going deep on this one, folks. We're diving into the origins of the SARS coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic. You might think you've heard it all, but we're looking at this from a different angle. We're going through patents and financial trails. It's a bit like we're detectives following clues. To guide us, we have an expert, someone who's done some really interesting research. His work is eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, his research has made a lot of people rethink what they thought they knew about where COVID-19 came from.
Exactly, and to help us understand all of this, we have, well, let me just introduce him, Dr. David Martin.
Dr. Martin's work is really fascinating.
One of the most shocking things he says is that COVID-19 wasn't just like a virus evolving naturally. He's found research on coronaviruses that goes back decades.
Yeah.
There's a much bigger story here. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It really is. To get it, we need to go back, like, way back to the late 1990s, maybe even the early 2000s. Back then, scientists were already looking at coronaviruses, mostly because they thought they could use them to make vaccines. But there were some worries, too, like, what if they could be used as bioweapons?
Whoa, that's a little scary. So what kind of research were they doing back then?
Well, they were focused a lot on coronaviruses in animals. Dr. Martin found this patent from Pfizer filed in 2000. It was for a vaccine for, get this, the spike protein, the same one that's in all the COVID-19 vaccines we have now. But here's the thing. It was for canine coronavirus.
Wait a minute. So they had a patent for the spike protein more than 20 years ago, and it was for a totally different coronavirus. That's crazy. I mean, everyone's been saying this was a brand new virus.
That's exactly what's so interesting about this. And that's just the beginning. Dr. Martin found another patent, this one from 2002. It was filed by NIAID, that's the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the one Dr. Fauci was in charge of. This patent, it describes a coronavirus they made in a lab, and they made it specifically to infect humans.
Hold on. Are you serious? They made a virus like SARS in a lab, and then they got a patent on it.
Yeah, that's what the patent says. And here's something else. Get this. They filed this patent months before the first SARS outbreak in Asia.
Okay, wow. I can definitely see why people think Dr. Martin is stirring things up.
Okay.
So how does the CDC fit into all of this? Didn't they patent the SARS coronavirus?
They did. They actually patented the virus itself. And then they
Yeah.
got another patent on the ways to test for it. So basically, they controlled the virus and how to find it.
That just doesn't seem right, doesn't it? Like there's a conflict of interest there.
Yeah, you would think so. They said it was for the public good, but Dr. Martin found that they really fought hard to get the patent office to approve it. They even paid to keep the patent application secret.
That's not exactly something you do if it's for everyone's benefit, is it?
No, it's not.
It seems like they were trying to have total control over the virus and testing for it. This is getting really intense. So what about treatments for SARS? Did anyone file patents for those back then?
Oh, yeah, they did. There's this company, Sequoia Pharmaceuticals. They filed for a patent on a SARS treatment, like right after the CDC filed theirs. Then things get interesting. Sequoia gets bought out by, get this, Pfizer, Crucell, and Johnson & Johnson.
Wow, hold on a second. So the company that had a treatment for this virus, the one the CDC seemed to want to keep all to themselves, they get bought by some of the biggest drug companies. This is starting to feel like one of those conspiracy theory movies.
It kind of is, right? Dr. Martin says this raises some serious questions, like how could they patent a treatment for a virus that the CDC was basically keeping secret?
That's a really good point.
And it gets even crazier. Dr. Martin found that Moderna, they got the sequence for the spike protein in SARS-CoV-2 before anyone even knew what the virus was.
You're kidding?
I'm serious.
It's like they knew it was coming. This is all just, I need a minute to think about this.
Yeah, I get it. It's a lot to take in.
Okay, I think I'm ready for more. Dr. Martin talks about these things called Ablinks patents from 2008. What are they all about?
Those are really interesting. They describe things about the virus that everyone thought were unique to SARS-CoV-2. Like the polybasic cleavage site, that's what makes it spread so easily between people. And the ACE2 receptor binding domain, that's how the virus gets into your cells.
So these patents from years before COVID-19 were already describing what makes this virus tick.
Exact.
It really makes you question if this was a new virus at all.
It does, doesn't it? And it gets even wilder. Get this. There are 73 patents on these features of the virus, and they were all issued before 2019.
73 patents.
Yeah.
That's insane. What does Dr. Martin say about all of this?
Well, he likes to use this quote from Peter Daszak from EcoHealth Alliance. I think it really sums it up. Daszak said, "We need to increase public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures, such as a pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process.
That's kind of scary to hear, considering everything we've talked about.
Yes.
It makes you wonder if this whole pandemic was planned.
Yeah, it makes you think. This quote actually goes along with something Dr. Martin talks about a lot.
Yeah.
This report from the WHO, the World Health Organization, called A World at Risk. It came out in 2019, before the pandemic. And it basically lays out a plan for how to deal with a global pandemic caused by a respiratory virus. It even talks about how important it is to get people to accept a vaccine mandate.
Okay, now I'm getting chills. So they had a plan to respond to a global pandemic, and they wanted everyone to get vaccinated. And they had all this before the pandemic even started. This is just too much.
I know, it's hard to wrap your head around. Oh, and there's one more thing. Moderna, in their patent applications from 2019, they actually used the words deliberate release when they were talking about a coronavirus.
Deliberate release? What does that even mean?
It's usually something you hear people say when they're talking about bioweapons research. Remember how we talked about how they were already looking at coronaviruses as bioweapons back in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I remember. Wow. I need a minute to process all of this.
I know, it's heavy stuff.
This is just the beginning. We've got a lot more to talk about, so stay tuned, folks. We're going to go even deeper into Dr. Martin's research in part 2.
One of the things that's really interesting about Dr. Martin's research is how he connects the dots, not just the science stuff, but the money, too. He shows where all the money went, like from government agencies like NIAID to these private companies like Moderna. And it makes you wonder, did the money influence the research? Especially the research on vaccines.
Yeah, that's important. You get lost in all the science talk sometimes. But when you follow the money, it tells you a lot about what people were really trying to do. It sounds like Dr. Martin is saying that maybe making money was more important than people's health.
It's definitely something to think about. You know, Dr. Martin's research shows that certain vaccines got a lot of attention and a lot of funding, like the mRNA vaccines. And maybe, just maybe, other types of vaccines got overlooked. I'm not saying mRNA vaccines are bad or anything, but it makes you wonder if the money played a role in which ones they focused on.
Right. It makes you think, who's really winning here?
Yeah.
And speaking of control, Dr. Martin talks about how the CDC having that patent, the one on the SARS coronavirus, and the one on how to test for it, he says it gave them a lot of power. Like they controlled what people knew about the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just controlling what people knew. Dr. Martin says that because the CDC had the patent, any researcher who wanted to study the virus, they had to get permission from the CDC. That's a lot of power. It could have stopped anyone who disagreed with them from doing research.
That's not good. So the people in charge of keeping us healthy could also control who gets to study the virus. That's like a monopoly, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's why what Dr. Martin is doing is so important. He's bringing all this information out into the open. He wants us to think for ourselves, to ask questions, and to make sure the people in power are being honest with us.
One of the things that really stuck with me from his research is that they were thinking about using the SARS coronavirus as a bioweapon, like all the way back in 2005. That's a really scary thought.
It is. It's really scary. If they were looking at it as a weapon, you have to wonder how safe they were being with it. What if it got out by accident? Or what if someone wanted to use it on purpose?
Yeah, those are questions that we need answers to. And it makes you think, should they even be doing this kind of research at all?
It's a tough question, a really tough question. I mean, on one hand, maybe they need to study these viruses so they can figure out how to stop them if someone tries to use them as a weapon. But then on the other hand, what if they make a mistake? Or what if the research gets into the wrong hands?
It's scary to think that the things that are supposed to protect us from disease could be used to hurt us.
It's a crazy world, isn't it?
Dr. Martin talks about how the mRNA technology, the one they used to make some of the COVID-19 vaccines,
Right.
he says they were actually researching it to use in HIV vaccines. And the research was funded by NIAI, the same agency that was involved in making that lab-created coronavirus we talked about.
Wow, that's a connection I hadn't thought about before. It's like they were looking at this technology for good, but also for, well, not so good.
It seems like that's always the case, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Every time we invent something new, it can be used to help people or to hurt them.
That's the double-edged sword of progress, I guess.
So is it on us then to make sure that these technologies are used the right way?
I think so. We have to be careful. And we have to have these tough conversations about the good and the bad. And we have to put rules in place to make sure no one misuses them.
That's a big responsibility.
It is.
And we can't forget about the role of the media in all of this. Dr. Martin says they really hyped up the pandemic.
Oh, yeah, they did.
He says they created this climate of fear,
They did.
and that made it easier to push things through,
Yeah.
like making everyone get vaccinated.